looks good at that angle, dude. That's like the worst. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we had to use something like these.
Is this your mouse?
Yeah.
No, I think you came with the room.
Oh.
What was the software?
Chronos.
It's a punch in, punch out software.
Yeah.
It's terrible. It's like
Is it just a device?
no, it's a whole payroll punch in. It's like a multiple devices.
Yeah.
It's been around for like
Yeah,
50
usually-
years.
Yeah,
Is it Linux based?
it was Unix based, and then they moved it to Windows. I don't
Okay,
know.
yeah.
And it was a really shitty port,
Yeah.
and so now they're moving it back to Linux.
Yeah.
And away from it was completely Java built, and they're moving a little bit away from that towards JavaScript.
Oh wow.
It's I don't know.
So they
doing
have
a
good
lot of-
direction though.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of crazy crap.
All right. Well, thanks for everybody showing up for the session here. I have a number of slides, but every time I do it, it's down to like 30 minutes. So there's room for questions and there's room for leaving early. So, it's up to you guys. So who am I? Let's see if this thing works.
We'll never
It
know.
used to work. That's the computer. No, no. We'll see. So my name's Alfred Nutili. I know some people in the room. I'm a coder, DevOps. I've been an owner of a shop. I'm a freelancer now, and I do some podcasting for about 15 years now. Never all of these at once. It's just a mix. So what I want to do is just talk about APIs. So basically, it's an application programming interface, and we'll just talk about defining that. But I also want to say that this can be really intimidating. And in the end, remember, you're not just building like a whole application. You're just building endpoints that your app can use to make a nice little widget on the screen, right? Like your users come into your Drupal site and you need to do a nice form that's dynamic. You can build an API for that. So you're not necessarily trying to build this whole standalone program, all right? So just keep that in mind as we go. I think this is my water. And so even though API might seem like too much, you can always think of it as like a way to create nice Ajax-y endpoints for your user interface. Okay, so throughout this whole process, I'm going to talk about consistency. So there's no real magic to APIs, but in discovering how to build an API, you're going to be extremely inconsistent. And because you're going to try and do things along the way that are unique or whatever, because we're always trying to, sometimes instead of reading, we just try at things, and then we think we discovered something, but it's already been discovered. So I'm going to introduce some consistencies. I'm going to introduce some consistencies for what to expect for data coming in, and I'm going to introduce some consistencies for what to expect for data going out. And it's these consistencies that hopefully will make it easy for you to just get going at it, because these are a lot of things you just don't need to be creative about. They're just easy, and they're not as standard, but they're just more commonplace in the industry. All right, so what I'll cover resources. These are the things that you're serving, like projects or images and sub-resources. I'll cover HTTP verbs, response codes, response formats. I'll cover pagination, a little bit of testing, and documentation and versioning, and I couldn't fit any more, so there's no really good reason for that. So, let's go at it. So the main one is resources. Now, a resource is like you're making this project and you're serving images, or you're serving, let's see, so you have a website and you're serving issues because it's a ticket system, right? So a resource is something that you're serving to the user, and you want to consistently pluralize these. And so I'm going to use GitHub for an example. I had a project where I did a ton of GitHub API work, and I learned a lot from GitHub. And just to step back for a moment, for the past 2 years, I've been doing a lot of API work, tons. And I've learned a lot and read a lot. And GitHub was a great example of APIs. They have great documentation, just read through them. And they just outline everything. And so it was a lot of time then building these APIs so that we can build Angular applications on top of them. And Angular/Laravel, it was sometimes widgets, right? So it's not like a whole API. So now when GitHub serves issues, they're going to serve it plural. And even when they're serving one issue, they're going to serve it plural. Now with GitHub, there's this one point where you'll see them saying user/issues. but the resource here is really issues, and it's plural. So even when you see them saying repos, owner, repo, issues, this isn't 2 repos, this is 1 repo, but still it's plural, okay? So, you know, 2 things to consider here. Well, 1, I'll jump into the next one after, is that just no matter what you're doing, even when you're just serving this one issue, because now they're asking for a number, that's what these semicolon, that's what the colon means, is that they're asking for just one issue, but they're still describing it as issues. So be plural in your resources. And also notice how, and I really like this, I do this probably too much, they're sub-resourcing. So now you're not only asking me for repos and the owner of that repo, and I usually never do this, but no big deal, there's a good reason. But they're also asking for the issues inside of that repo. So instead of having one endpoint for issues, they have one for repos that then you can get the issues inside of. So that's sub-resourcing. It's just a nice way to really get all your information together, and you could think of it in many situations. So resources, keep them plural. The next one is resources are nouns, not verbs. And that's another big one. You're gonna try and get creative and name this endpoint, get me issues. And it's like, don't, just call them a noun, okay? The thing there is, so we're gonna stick with places or things. And the thing there is like, let HTTP methods be your verbs, all right? So when you're like get issues, that's your verb, get, put, post, and delete. And those verbs will mean something to you more as we go on. But that's how the API, the consistency of using your software will be more, it will make more sense overall. And we're gonna cover all these actions in a moment. Any questions so far? Because like I said, I'm not, this isn't a 50-minute slideshow, so I can take questions as we go. Anyone? Just pipe up, raise your hand, whatever. So let's see. So one tip about resources is a lot of times when you're doing resources, it's good to use a UUID. So say I go to your website and I'm hitting your API and it says user 5. Well, I can then sneak around and say, let me see what user 4 has. And you might have blocked it, but maybe you didn't, maybe you forgot. So with these little tricks, you can kind of make your site a little bit more secure and a little bit more scalable as you split up a site into smaller sites. By having a UUID, you can separate. So yeah.
What's the difference between a regular ID?
Good, thank you, because I skipped that in my head. So when you build a site, you know, I don't know, what do people use there? Drupal, WordPress, what's the commons here? Drupal? So Drupal has a node system, and that's an auto-incrementing field, node 1, node 2, node 3, node 4, right? Mm-hmm. So Drupal has modules and stuff for this, but you're basically saying, hey, I don't want my resource to be auto-incrementing. Mm-hmm. I want to assign a UUID, which is usually 5, so it's usually 4 segments of numbers that are so unique that the chances of it being duplicate in your system is null, right? Okay. And so with those libraries, you can say, well, it's not user 1, it's user blah, 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 right? And by doing that, you're avoiding that security. Not that it's going to be a big deal. This is like, hey, if you really want to do it, right? Yeah. But you're also like, hey, I have a system that has my users, and I have this other system where they has reporting related to users, and if it's incrementing is out of order with mine, but instead, and I won't have a race condition, right? Like I made this user here, but I had to make it here as well, and this was incrementing 5, and this was 4. So you can avoid race conditions too, and separation of systems and stuff. So, and so this library is just a handy library. I think it's really common. It's the Ramsey UUID library. Throw that into your project, and you can use UUIDs. This is just a side tip. Don't worry about it. It's just something to think about. So let's go into HTTP actions. So we've defined resources. We now have a way to talk to the user to say, hey, go get issues, right? So we're going to say to them, you want to get many? Well, just use the HTTP method action get, and then you can get issues. So by using your browser to get here, you're going to get issues. So again, the actions, the HTTP is going to be your verb. You can get one, same verb, get, but just by convention, it's going to have this number at the end that's going to help your system know it's just one get. And again, get is going to be some. And a nice little thing they do here is like, I don't want all the issues. I just want number 1, comma, number 2 or whatever. And that allows you to just have a nice quick way to say, just give me a couple of issues or whatever. But again, consistency. Like you might be like, hey, I'm feeling really creative tonight. I'm going to put a / there. Don't. Like they've already figured this out, right? So using this comma syntax, and that's just a nice way to just quickly get it done. And I'll show in some other places where it's tempting to try and do it a different way, but you'll see this all pays off. All right, so that was our getters. So now we're going to talk about HTTP actions setters. These are when you want to make a resource or update a resource, okay? So one of the setters for HTTP is post. We just talked about get. And post is the moment you want to make a resource. Now, this is what's really nice here. It's like, I'm going to make an issue. And I know that because the last resource here is issues. There's no number after there because you would not have a number after a post. And you're basically at this point able to say, I'm going to make an issue. And I'm going to show you how to make a payload for a post after. But in this case, it's just, you know, you're helping yourself, you're helping your system be consistent, and you're helping the user who's going to use your API be like, he's all over the place. Well, no, I'm not, and there's consistency. So another action is put. And a good way to remember put for me was like using put is when you know where you're going to put something. In this case, I know I'm going to put at number 1. And so by doing that, I'm using the HTTP action put, and I'm going to put some information back here to update number, in this case we'll say 1. And so that's your other action to set your resource. And then there's delete. I think this will probably be your last action really to build an API. And in this case, we're saying I want to delete that resource. And it might be tempted to remove this and delete all issues. That's okay. I'm just realize you're deleting all issues. But you know, with this consistency, you're not trying to then do something weird like use a post to delete something or use a post to update something. You're just forming a kind of standard, industry standard consistency. And again, there's no hard rules. These are just some standards or consistent things I see on the web. All right, so that is most of our HTTP actions. Get, put, post, delete. But then there's also the action of querying. Like, hey, I want to just get your active projects. So we have the person saying, I want to get, and I want your issues. But now I want active equals 1 and page equals 2. Here's common pagination, right? So instead of doing issues /active /1 /page /2, right? You're just making a query string for the person to use with get. This never shows up anywhere else in your APIs. It's relative, you know, in the book of John, whatever you want to call it, the book of Al, right? So but in using a get, you can then use these query strings to get the next page in pagination or get the active ones. And so that's a good example of using query strings for that. And again, they do it here with a comma, consistency. Give me the tags or items, give me the resource issues with tags 1, 4, 9, or however you want to read that. It could be 1 and 4 and 9. So you have options there. I'm not sure how I would style an and statement. Or you know, you'd have to think about that or Google it, like go to GitHub's API, read it. Facebook has an API, it's pretty well established. Things like that, just read what they're doing. GitHub's just known for good APIs, so. Okay, so now we have our actions. And the next thing I just want to cover is like, how do you deliver data to your system, okay? Now, a moment ago, we talked about post and we said issues, but there's not much here. He or she's posting to this point. They have to give your system data. And that's when we get into content type JSON. And that's the standard format that you should try and use at all costs. And I'll show you in a moment something that I think is a bad habit. And when you get this, you're going to ask the user or for yourself to be consistent, you're going to ask for a JSON object that's set up in a certain way. Now, consistency, right? So for me, I tend to always make my incoming post to be inside of this data key. So if you're to read this, there's a data key, and inside of here, there's this data. I wish it was indented a little bit more. And so inside of here is the data or the resource that I'm posting, okay? This is not, I don't think this is as important. I think you could easily have just left the data out and did that. But again, JSON, nice, clean, easy to read. You can kind of get a sense of why this is nice, because I'm going to show you something in a moment that's not that nice, okay? So there's post using JSON, application JSON, nice and clean. A lot of applications they are trying to use this format, and they end up having you post that back to a system. That's hard to read. And not only is that hard to read, it has more of a chance of being corrupted by the things a browser has to do to keep strings safe going inside. So try to avoid using www form URL encoded. Focus on using post the way it was meant to be used as JSON, and things will just be easier. This is one of the books I'm going to reference at the end. It's Phil Sturgeon, Build APIs You Won't Hate. It's a 2-hour read. It's a good book. He's a funny writer. He's a funny guy. You know, he just says, you know, this is one of those things he would like to just not exist, and it's just a good habit to avoid.
We'll also use XML, which.
Okay.
Oh, you're gonna go there? Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm not. Focus on JSON. What Josh is
saying.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah. If you have to use XML for a project, you have to. But in your case, we're gonna focus on JSON. We're gonna make believe you have some control here.
I was gonna say,
So,
yeah, because
yeah.
we always require you to do both.
Oh, really?
Well,
Yeah.
to the vendors,
Yeah.
because they don't support both. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. I had to do SOAP for a while. That was horrible.
Oh, that's horrible.
So, okay, so the person is now using your system. They're giving you data. They're making requests. Let's cover some response codes, and then we'll cover after that how to return data. So here's some response codes. They're here. Again, you don't need to be creative. You have successful response codes, which are in the 200 range. 200, everything's okay. 201, it's created. 202, it's accepted. 204, no content. And you respond. All right, this is a nice facade from Laravel where I can nice, cleanly type response, JSON, data, message, 200. In all of this, everybody's using Drupal 8, for example. It's in the Symfony library for the routes, the response class. And if you dig deep into that class, there's about 100 of these listed out in that class that will say 200 equals blah, blah, blah. So you really can read it and find it quickly in your IDE if you just dig around. Redirections, they tend to be 300s and higher, so 301 move permanently, 307 temporary. So they're here, you know, there's no need to make up a number and be consistent once you choose one. Sometimes I have trouble with that, and so I'm here, I'm just redirecting the person. There's 400. 400s, you're basically saying, hey, you messed up, try again. And so I could say a bad request, unauthorized, and again, I'm responding. Maybe it's forbidden, maybe it's a 404 not found, or a 405 method not allowed, like you try to get and it's really a post route. But here's a 404, it's a good example of not found. If you go to GitHub and you go to a private repo and then log out and go to that repo, you're gonna get a 404 that is not found. That's a nice security feature. You're not even letting someone know it exists. It's nice. It's annoying because you're like, you know, what's going on? But you're like, it's a nice feature. So instead of saying forbidden, just do a 404. And I'll cover this in a moment because this is about responding. How are we gonna give the data back to them? But so these are saying to the client, you need to try something different. But then there's the 500 errors, and this is the last of the segments. There's an error or not implemented. That one I've never used. Sometimes you just can't deal with errors because your system just crashed, but sometimes in your controllers, try to catch everything. So your controller in your application is the last moment between your user and your system, okay? So in your controller, everything that comes in, try it. In PHP, it's try, and then if there's an error, you catch it and throw it back to the user with the proper sense of like, hey, this is a 500 error, I'm sorry, come back in a little while, right? So you're trying and catching and giving them back an error. And that's where the 500s are. All right. So that's you know, we've taken stuff in, we've helped give them information about how it went, and now we're gonna give them some data back. All right. So at this point, we're coming back to JSON. We're focusing on JSON. And we're gonna give them back this, okay? And again, I tend to focus on this, there we'll go back a moment. I tend to focus on putting everything in data. And I do this because then I also have a message one down here. So whoever is taking the information back from me, I can give them a little message saying success loading blog. Or maybe this was an error. Instead of just saying 40 whatever, I can also say, you know, according to our records, we couldn't find this particular thing, right? So you can give them consistently something that they can show on their screen, or not. Maybe it's not a screen, it's something else talking to your thing, the Internet of Things. There's something else talking to your application. And then in the data, they know they can go in here and get what they want, okay? Now, what they want is a resource or resources. In my case, it's a blog. Now, there's different rules to this. Some people, whether I'm returning one or many, they'll put it in an array. In this case, I stuck it into an object, okay? And I'm saying, here's my blogs you wanted. I named it plural, again, consistency. Here's the title, the body, the state. Here's all the tags that this blog had. Here's all the comments with this blog, because maybe I want to give them a little bit of starter information so they can display it. You don't have to do this. It's just a thought. But this is really helpful here, is now, by the way, here's a select list you might need to show on the page. So I'm also giving them some information they need to build a page. Instead of them building the page and then making another query for all the countries and another query for all the tags and another query for all, you can only make so many queries before your site's gonna get slow and your server's gonna get whatever, right? So you can't do everything for them, but honestly, you're probably building this for yourself. You probably made a UI to use it. So try to help your UI by giving it the data it needs that, you know, you got to kind of say like, hey, I can't do everything it needs, but give it enough information to build those select lists to maybe give it some comments or whatever else it needs. So this is the place for select list. And then again, the message, just consistency. Whether it's a success, 200 or 400 or 300, we give them back a message just to give them more than just a number. So that's the response format. JSON, nice and clean, easy to read. All right. So with that said, this is not as hard as it seems. It's pagination. I always put this off to the last part of the project. Now I don't, because it's really not that bad. Depending on your system, it should be able to give pagination, and it should be able to take pagination, or it should be able to take a query string. So what I mean from that is I'm returning this consistently: total, per page, current page, last page, these things that everybody needs. And then in the data is the array of results. See how that starts with a square bracket instead of curly? That's an array of results. Now, you know, this means that they're on page 2 and they can use this URL to help with their UI building. And not just UI, but just with their whatever's talking to this. And later on, they can talk to the same endpoint and say, give me page 3. But again, just like before, no magic, just consistency. However your system does it, it's fine. You know, just try to be consistent, all right? All right, let's see. Okay, so now we get a sense of how to do all this stuff. I want to bring testing to light because it's so stinking easy, okay? You're building an API, people are relying on your endpoints, you're working on a team, and so you swear broke everything, but you don't know because no one's been testing. It could have happened 2 weeks ago, right? So testing an API is just hitting those endpoints. PHP unit, you can do it right from there, right? PHP unit's fast, it comes with everything. Just use it to build your test. And I'll show an example in a moment. But use it to build, use it per build to test your route. So for where I work, we deploy stuff, we build it, right? So you push to git dev, and all of a sudden CodeShift spins up our servers and runs the whole deployment and tests everything. If it passes, it gets deployed. If it doesn't, we get a message, okay? So every build, we're running our test against our routes to see if anyone broke anything. So maybe someone changed a model and now an endpoint doesn't work, or it's not delivering data like we thought, okay? It's so easy. And it's a low-hanging fruit, and it doesn't have to be intense. It doesn't have to be too complex. And you can even test your routes live. So you can now have all of these tests. You can be hitting your live site with non-destructive tests, and you can just make sure nothing's gone down. It's just a nice way to be, hey, status is good. And it's really this easy. Here's a PHP unit test. All I'm saying is, hey, log me in as this user, right? Then let's do something. I'm going to call using get to that API endpoint. And I'm going to assert it's a 200 response or 201 or whatever. And then I'm going to get those results, by the way, and I'm going to just dig into them. In this case, I'm just going to make sure it has a data key. But you could even make sure it has a tag key or whatever that is so required by your application. If it's not there, you're going to have a lot of people who, you know, are going to have a broken thing using it. So this simple unit test for each route, I mean, it's copy paste, and then before long you have this nice collection. And I'll cover this more in a moment too. about where else it comes in handy, which is documentation. All right. So tests also come in handy because as a developer, you're 6 months later, you forgot everything you just built. You're like, well, how does this application work? Well, you open up your test and you read them. This is how this application works. This is how this endpoint wants me to talk to it. And so tests are a good way to document for you, the coder. So it just really comes in handy. Another form of documentation other than tests, now I lean more towards tests, but I'm actually starting to appreciate these other tools. Swagger is nice. It makes a nice UI that the user can come and actually hit all your endpoints for real in the UI. It actually defines the structure of the content and everything. It's self-generating after you annotate your code. I'll show that in a moment. But it can be heavy. I felt like it slowed down our development work, but I think we kind of maybe overdid it. We were using it to define our models, and it just got really hard. We lost our nice quick flow with it. So I'm going to go back to it in one project and see if we can trim it down a bit because I really like the UI it made for our project. And then this one I want to give a try. And what they all do, Swagger and this one, is they just have you annotate your code so that maybe on the controller for the index, you would just annotate some things about it, and then it would take that and it just creates a documentation. And sometimes it's actually a web interface, which is really cool. Swagger was really cool. I could go there, I could dump a payload in there and be like, okay, my payload's fine, or I can get results and make it do something because I needed that something. So documentation is key. If I say something now, 90% of the people here won't agree. Documentation does not belong in comments in your code, okay? Documentation belongs somewhere else. And overall, like this annotation is nice, but if you're trying to define, like, here's how you use this particular method and blah, blah, blah in your code, I think you're gonna have a lot less quality documentation. It has to be brought out somewhere for everybody to see, and I think these will help. All right, so that's documentation. So let's see, one other thing here is versioning. Okay, this is a tricky one. You made your API and you want to change things. Now, one way that I like to version is I just put a V1 there, all right? And if you want to use the next version of it, maybe it's V1.1 or V2. So I can quickly start just serving different stuff. It works for me. I've never done a heavy website like GitHub, right? I'm just building tools for this company. So I like that one. This was interesting because you can actually do a subdomain version. And it's just, what's nice about this is that means that server could be serving 2 different websites from 2 different repositories, or there could be 2 different servers. So you really open up a lot of flexibility where this is typically going to be the same server, the same code, the same branch. So this is kind of nice. I might actually start doing that before long. GitHub, I think, does this. And I haven't tried that. It looks good. I read it. I kind of understood it. So they're using headers. And by doing this in the header, they have a way to smartly get to what they want, right? So that's another way to version your API. So now as I move things forward and I break things or add new features, I'm not going to hurt anyone using version 1. And I'll go into the next part of versioning, which is semantics. Typically what that means is you've released your API at 1.0.0. I should have had another 0.0 in there. And you're just doing minor changes. So typically you don't have to do anything. I mean, it's a minor change. They can keep using your API. But then when you're doing breaking changes, like you've decided to really change everything, break whatever, maybe like different way of delivering the resource, different permissions, that's when you want to version out and make this breaking change moment. And most people will know I'm not going to use 2 if we're on 1 until I know our system can use 2. But I'm more willing to go up to 1.3 because I know nothing's going to break. So keep that in mind too while you're versioning, and that will help out. Another thing is to do a changelog. It's just a file in your repo. Just start typing what you're changing during every push, even a minor one. So, you know, we're merging into prod. We're up to 1.3.2, few bug fixes. And that changelog just is nice to have. Everybody can go read it, see what's been going on. So that's versioning. And I think I don't know how many more I have left. Not many. Okay, not many. This is it, almost. The book. This is I 2-hour read or whatever. It's not deep. He points to a lot of other good books and sources. So I can't say enough about, just reading it, because in the end, you don't have to spend a ton of time recreating everything. So that's a good one. And then just more about me, my site, which is whatever. But we do some podcasting, and that's kind of fun. It's Developers Hangout, and it's a fun podcast. We go over the news of the week in the tech industry for PHP kind of focus, but not all PHP. And then we cover some topics for the week that we go into depth with, where we just basically discuss, me and a friend of mine, colleague. So that's Developers Hangout. So check it out.
When did you start podcasting?
Not long ago, like 3 or 4 months. I've listened for like ever, but we really, I just finally said, just got to do it. So, but
And it's been going well so far, growing in popularity and stuff.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it's relative. So.
Yeah, that's always a work in progress.
Yeah. So, but and the point is, it's still fun. So this is a lot of stuff. Is there any questions overall? Like I said, it's not a long topic. I don't know how to make it any longer. I tried. So. Has anyone used APIs, made APIs? Anyone has an API they like? Any APIs stick out that you've liked? Like,
I'm using a ton of them. The app that I'm building, I had to build an API and then also connect to several for various services. And
whose did you like? Anyone in
well,
particular that we might know?
Well, there's this one client that built it custom for me that I got to work with, and I love it. So
That's cool. Yeah.
It's just the way you want.
Yeah,
The
that's a good
hardest part
point.
for me though was the like the OAuth integration.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't want to bring up OAuth, but no, it's good that you do. OAuth is really hard. You've probably done some OAuth too, Josh. I wrote about it recently.
I did OAuth. I helped work some commits to the OAuth Drupal module a while ago.
Yeah.
But the best API I've actually worked with is actually the Google Docs spreadsheet API.
That's interesting.
I had a hack for change mobile app we were building.
Yeah,
And,
I remember.
we-
Well, what's interesting with the Google spreadsheets, most owners of companies love spreadsheets. Most people you're working with, and like you'll never get them out of that. But if you can build an API to pull their data out from that UI, then you've created an application from something they're comfortable putting data into. And you guys did it for that.
So it was like it was an app that just showed locations
of the water places in
the
library.
food bank. It was a food bank.
Oh, food bank, yeah.
And it just showed all the locations of the food bank. And I walked into the group. I was because I'm not like a mainline developer. I'm like a DevOps, like support developers.
Yeah.
And I walked in the group, and they were building this monstrous Drupal application.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
And this is just not what Drupal's for. And the owner there, because with Hack for Change, you always have like a stakeholder there. She was like, I just want to enter a spreadsheet. I was like, Angular app, not even authentication needed here.
Well, Drupal, Google offers a lot of these APIs. It's like you use their spreadsheets, you got an API back there, and we forget that because we want to build everything. It's like the evolution of like our thinking. It's like now we're not building the thing, we're connecting the 5 things that they already built for us.
Yeah, and that's scary.
Right.
Like,
we adjust, So
I'm gonna wake up someday and Google Docs isn't gonna exist. And,
yeah.
That's the fear that we all have. It's like,
but we move on. I don't see Cobalt anywhere or Lotus Notes.
Well, except that IBM.
Cobalt's still up.
Yeah.
Lotus Notes is actually
still alive.
But just pretty much just within IBM, as far as I know. My mother-in-law still uses it. So. So anyone else like have any APIs they built or have any experience with these things?
I have one I hate.
Which one?
I've been working with the Mind Body API.
Oh, I've worked with that.
Yeah.
What do you find frustrating about it?
Their documentation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or lack thereof. So I get the importance of documentation, and like I look back at an API I wrote and thought,
I inherited some terrible ones, like code-wise.
There's real lag between their documentation and
Well, and the separation is like if I have to go into the code and then document later, it can be hard. But if your documentation's in the code area, you can more easily adjust it as you go.
But I have to say, working with, I'll just speak generally to payment processors in general, because you have to use authentication for that.
Yeah.
And I found that what sort of made it tough is, especially if you're doing like an Angular app, it's like needing pretty much like a PHP backend, like API wrapper for it. Pretty much.
For those authenticated routes.
Yeah, because you can't really use. It's not really advisable to use Angular to authenticate.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, it goes back to the OAuth and that stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a good one though. But then all your PHP route is saying, hey, make this request for me.
Yeah, and that part was really cool. So
Yeah.
the one I worked with recently integrated with Zora. So Zora is just a payment processor.
Yeah.
I actually ended up doing building the API in a Drupal module.
Yeah.
So just
And so it talked to your endpoint.
yep. So it just uses hook menu to establish the
Yeah.
kind of feed the arguments through it. Through a hook menu call.
Yeah.
And, it's actually super easy.
Yeah. Well, it's a good example though. You building an API just for you,
Yeah.
for that application, right?
But it's like you build an API for an API. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's hard because you can't pass that security over. So it's a good point though with the security. And OAuth, yeah. I mean that's it depends on who you're using. It's tricky. And to build your own, PHP has a really good OAuth library. So if you use that, you can get really far really quick. But it is very difficult to gain the concepts. On my website, I have a blog area, and if you search for OAuth, I just recently wrote an article about it because it's just so hard to grasp.
Then there's the two versions though.
Yeah, if you had to use either or, yeah. But if you're making your own, you would always use two.
That's what I ended up doing. 'Cause it was
Yeah.
a lot easier.
No, never use. I don't think. Yeah, unless you're stuck with using it. Yeah. So two. It's still yeah, it's still tedious. I mean, you have to refresh your tokens, and also using GitHub and everything. Their login systems and stuff. Their OAuth. I mean, it takes time to get a sense of it. It's not totally easy.
No.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, no, it's just an extension.
All right. So I think, I mean, that's it on my end. So I don't know of any other questions or thoughts I have to bring up. So
Thank you, Al.
yeah.